Jim Jans is not here. Alex Kay.
Here.
Anthony Nguyen.
Here.
John Malbec.
Here.
Okay. And we have Council Member Mayor Kerry Wiest as our council liaison.
Yes, I am.
That gives us special status.
That, all the attention you guys want.
Okay, now, we'll go on to the approval of minutes. For the August 14th meeting, you've all been sent the minutes. Are there any corrections or modifications to minutes that you'd like to see?
I was absent at that meeting, but the precept update seems to be rather abbreviated, wasn't it?
Well, hearing none, do we have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? All right. Next item is the presentation.
So it's gonna take 1 minute to shift cameras.
1 minute while he gets things lined up for you folks, and then we'll.
No public
Am I
comments?
up to deck, or is there other presentations?
Our camera
I don't know.
precedes our horse and buggies that are usually outside, so.
Fair enough.
Paul, no public comments?
There
Can we
was
get the
no
mic a
public
little
here.
closer to him?
There's no public.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind sliding that down.
All the public for the
We
presenter.
seem to be out of chord.
I think your chair's on top of the cord. If
My chair?
yeah.
No,
No, maybe
it's-
no.
that's as
Never
far as
mind.
it goes.
Sorry. Just
So
kidding.
maybe
You wanna
if
sit
you
here?
stand
No.
right there, that'll be good. Screen should be coming on momentarily.
Scoot in a little bit. How about that?
Technology's going in this.
All right.
It's all right. So, well, thanks very much for having me. My name is Boris Lipkin, and I'm the Northern California Regional Director for the High Speed Rail Authority. So, nice to be here with you. I know you got an update, I think back in February from my predecessor, Ben Triposis. And so I'll kind of focus in on what we've done, what's happened since then, a little bit on our 2018 business plan, as well as what's kind of coming up next in the San Francisco-San Jose section. Here in Atherton, the work that we've been doing, as well as kind of some of our outreach and what's coming down the line. So I think we can have more of a conversation. So if you want to ask questions or kind of have more dialogue as we go, you don't have to wait till the end. Just chime in, and I'm happy to have that conversation. And then with me here, I have Morgan Galley, who leads our outreach for the San Francisco-San Jose section, as well as James Tung, who's our project manager for the section as well. So if I can click, let's see, there we go. Starting at kind of the statewide level, and I won't belabor too much stuff that's before February because you probably are very familiar with that, but I'll give kind of a little bit of an overview. So the first thing that I just want to highlight is in February, probably when Ben was here, was maybe the day or two after we had a new CEO come in. So Brian Kelly, who was the former Secretary of Transportation, was appointed as our CEO and selected by the board in the very beginning of February. He brought with him Joe Hedges as our Chief Operating Officer, who's leading the delivery of the program, as well as Pam Muzukami, who's our Chief Deputy and helping kind of run the agency. Here in Northern California, Ben left the agency in March, and then I came in first as acting regional director in April, and then was appointed to the position in August. I've been working on the program since 2011 in a variety of capacities in Sacramento, but I've always been, I'm from the Bay Area. I grew up not too far from here, and had done a lot of work in sort of the Northern California region. So after Ben's departure, Brian asked me to step into this role. With me, kind of in the Northern California leadership team changes, we have Rebecca Kohlstrand, who's leading the director of projects, and then, as mentioned, James is here as a new San Francisco to San Jose project section manager for us.
May I ask you a question?
Yeah.
When you say Brian Kelly was Secretary of Transportation, is that at
Sure.
the state level?
Yes, yes.
Thank you.
So,
That's, I just
okay.
wasn't sure.
Yep.
Thank you very much.
Could you tell us a little about your background?
Sure. My background is in planning and transportation, and I first started working on the program as a consultant in 2011, focusing on our business plans and kind of overall strategy. I switched over to the state side in 2014 and was the deputy director for strategic planning before stepping into this capacity. So I've worked on some of our funding and kind of key questions about the vision for the project. And I grew up in Palo Alto and went to high school here, and kind of have lived in Santa Clara County for a large chunk of my life. So, again, we have a little bit of a whoa, sorry. We have a bit of a time. Okay, I don't want to belabor too much of the timeline because I think you folks are probably more familiar than most of what's come to date. The few things that I'll kind of highlight on this is sort of the process that we've gone through since adoption of the blended system concept, going from the kind of 4-track system that was first looked at for high speed, kind of having a dedicated corridor, to sharing the tracks with Caltrain. And sort of that's gone through several steps in the development process. Started with Caltrain electrification and kind of them going through their environmental process as we sort of did the planning work of, okay, well, how do you add high-speed trains to the corridor? What does that look like? We've kind of moved that to the next step of actually looking at the environmental clearance for that exact question of what's the infrastructure necessary for us to be able to run and share the corridor. What does that start to look like? Refine, and we'll continue to refine some of those alternatives as Caltrain's gotten into their construction and continue to move forward. And so kind of the timeline that you can kind of see the steps that the corridor's been through here. And I've already mentioned the new leadership. I'll talk a little bit about the 2018 business plan and what that means.
What's your target date for getting the environmental report out?
So for the San Francisco San Jose section, March 2021 for the final record of decision.
That's it. Oh, when do you expect the draft to be out?
So about a year before that. And I think I have a slide, about 20 slides down.
So you've
To
got
that.
a year and a little bit to finish it up.
Yep. Yeah.
Okay.
And we can talk about kind of where we're at and what's coming.
Yeah, we will.
Excellent. So as I mentioned, Brian came in February. Our draft business plan was due March 9th, so he had about a month to make his imprint upon it. And so we've gone sort of through 3 kind of key steps of positioning the program, starting with the business plan, which laid out the overall vision. That was followed by the program baseline, which is really kind of a management tool for us to lay out, okay, when, what, and how much it's going to cost. So basically, scope, schedule, budget, questions for what we can deliver and what we have funding for. And then the third piece of it, which is being finalized right now, is the program management plan, which is really focused on how do we as an agency work and what are the responsibilities and how do we work to deliver the program. And so these have been sort of 3 steps that the new leadership has really taken to change a bit of the direction that we've had to date.
Is the management plan published? Can we get that off your website?
I don't know. I think it's still being finalized. But I think as soon as it's finally become a public document, so we can certainly share. And I think it's imminent. I don't know the exact date of it, but we would happily share that with you. So the 2018 business plan, this is our business plans are something that we have to do every 2 years. It's one of our 2 major legislative reports. Every even year we do a business plan. And every odd year we do a project update report. So that is basically our yearly reporting to the legislature. The business plan kind of updates the overall vision and kind of the status of where the project is at, and lays out all the kind of key numbers, costs, ridership revenue. All of that is in the business plan. Having worked on a few of these, the business plans evolve and kind of represent sort of the latest information that we have, and some things change, and I'll talk a little bit about what's new in the 2018 plan, but some things are kind of, very much hallmarks for what we're trying to accomplish. So the authority goals, these are the same ones from 2016 that, were carried forward into 2018. So what we're trying to do is initiate service as soon as possible. That's kind of our number 1 objective is get high-speed trains running. The second part is looking at making strategic investments that can be linked over time, but that provide immediate benefits. So here, one example is Caltrain electrification, which we're helping fund. In Southern California, we also have several projects that are kind of fitting the same criteria of being early investments that will be linked as the program develops. And then the third part is positioning.
You then are planning to have high-speed rail service on the Caltrain lines when their electrification is complete, but before you made any changes, is that correct?
I think that there will be things that we will need. So, for example, a light maintenance facility is something that we will need to run service on the corridor. There will be other things that we will want to do that may not be sort of to answer the question of is it necessary. You could essentially run with the existing curves, for example. So we would look to straighten some curves over time. Whether that's a necessary from day one or not it's not necessary, but we would like to do that, if that makes sense.
Would you run revenue service from Gilroy to San Francisco?
Well, and that's what we were going to look at. So you're beating me to the punch, and that's on my next slide. But give me a second. I promise I'll get to that. Because that's what's new in this plan. That's different from the 2016 plan. So this is sort of the things that have stayed the same as some of the key goals. What's changed, and this is getting straight into your question, is we identified the Valley to Valley line in the 2016 plan as the place that we were able to prove out that we would want to start service. So that Valley to Valley line in the 2018 plan is from San Francisco to Bakersfield. And then the question that we've sort of introduced is if we look at where the funding is at, looking at phasing that line in two segments. So one segment being what we have under construction in the Central Valley, and looking at connecting that up to the San Joaquin service that goes up to Sacramento and over to Oakland. And then the second part, and this gets into the question about San Francisco to Gilroy, is if we're able to extend the Caltrain electrification project from San Jose to Gilroy, would we be able to meet our requirements and start service in this corridor, so Gilroy to San Francisco, as a interim step on the way to the Valley to Valley line? That then leaves us with our next mega project, which is the Pacheco Pass tunnels, which for the next few years our focus is going to be on getting, continuing the design advancement there, looking at how we can de-risk some of those, looking at soil samples, really understanding what we would have to do to build those tunnels. We're going to be holding a tunnel symposium with experts from around the world to kind of help guide us on some of kind of more advanced tunneling technology that's out there.
Would you pay for the electrification of the San Jose Gilroy line? And would that be on separate? That will not be on the Union Pacific tracks. You're going to put in separate tracks for that.
Well, so the concept, and this kind of has come out of a change in Union Pacific's stance on some of this, in that for several years they told us that they want nothing to do with us and go away, and where they've come around is if we can make sure that their service is still accommodated, that they would be potentially open to sharing the corridor with us. And so that's what we're working with them on. The question between Gilroy and San Jose is whether we can extend the blended system using that existing corridor, so they would be basically primarily a 3-track railroad. So 2 electrified tracks for us and for Caltrain service that could serve the existing stations, as all the way down to Gilroy.
Would you pay for those for the electrification of those 2 tracks, or would Caltrain?
Well, I think so. We're studying that environmentally, and that's part of kind of our program baseline. The question of ultimately the funding and access, and what does that look like? I don't think there's no final decision on that. We're assuming the cost of it essentially as we carry forward, but there are questions around, for example, what is our relationship when it comes to the existing Caltrain stations along that corridor between us and Caltrain and VTA, and how does that end up working out? We don't know that. So right now we're kind of designing to accommodate Caltrain service. The ultimate funding, we don't have a funding agreement right now for kind of finalizing that.
Does sharing the corridor with Union Pacific include or exclude sharing tracks?
So the design would be 3 tracks, so 2 electrified tracks for north and south, just same thing that you have here, and then 1 freight track for them but with the ability, if there's an issue on the track or they're doing maintenance, we would hang the catenary high enough so that if they needed to cross over, they would be able to. So they don't want to, their one requirement is they don't want to run under the wire. But in an emergency kind of situation, they would be willing to, and we would accommodate that. Does that make sense?
Is Caltrain happy with additional service between Gilroy and,
I mean,
it's a competitive line.
Sure. So, I will generally try not to speak for Caltrain because I don't want to. I would like them to speak for themselves. I think what I will say is, for as long as I've known kind of South County has wanted more service, South Santa Clara County, and I think we've heard that at both kind of the VTA level and at the Caltrain board member level, that is something that they would like to see. The challenge has been for a long time basically dealing with Union Pacific, which is
a separate issue.
still a challenge.
But also revenue. I mean, in terms of, are there enough people to support going all the way to Gilroy and...
Right, and again, that's sort of the question that Caltrain would ultimately need to decide, and they're going to look at that through their business plan process of what makes sense for the Gilroy service. Right now, it's a bit of a chicken and egg problem in that the service is 3 trains a day in, kind of going north in the morning and going south in the afternoon. And if you miss one of those, I mean, there's a bus, but it's very difficult. And so does it make sense collectively for there to be better service? There's certainly interest from those communities. Ultimately, what VTA does in terms of the funding for it, or what Caltrain does in terms of providing it, those are all the things that we're trying to accommodate it. What actually gets down there, I think, is a question. I mean, we would obviously run our stations there are Gilroy and San Jose, but there's Morgan Hill and San Martin and some of the other San Jose stations in between there. Those would be questions for Caltrain.
Okay.
So, Boris, just a quick
Yeah.
question. You mentioned there are 2 directions, which is Gilroy to San Francisco and Bakersfield to Sacramento.
Well, Bakersfield to either Madera or Merced would then connect to the existing San Joaquin service that goes to Sacramento and to Oakland.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's connecting to an existing operating
Yeah.
system.
Yeah.
Does that mean you go to Sacramento before you go to Los Angeles?
Yes.
Well, not on a high-speed train. So what the voters, how they defined the system in 2008 was through Prop 1A, that phase 1 is San Francisco to Los Angeles and Anaheim, and phase 2 is the extensions to Sacramento and San Diego. So it would, basically that service would connect. So there's existing rail service that you can take from Sacramento down to Madera and Merced and Fresno and all those places. So there would be a connection to that service. It wouldn't necessarily be our train that we would be looking at using the infrastructure that we're building, and we wouldn't be building it into Sacramento at this stage. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. No.
It's an existing system. Does it actually go to Merced or does it go to Madera?
It goes to both.
Okay.
And there's plans for more service on that line as well, and I mean it's a separate agency dealing with those questions, but okay. So that going back to this slide, kind of what's new in the plan in terms of phasing the Valley to Valley line, that's what we're exploring, and we'll have more information on those 2 segments in our March 2019 project update report. But the goal is to finish the entire line by 2029. So basically have San Francisco to Bakersfield done and get through the mountains. So getting to the kind of San Francisco to San Jose project section, where we're at is we're going through the environmental process and looking at alternatives. The general concept is looking at the 51-mile blended corridor and looking at how can we minimize our impact. So, looking for the smallest footprint that we can realistically use while meeting, our requirements. And so we have 2 alternatives. They have the same stations, so 4th and King, Millbrae, and San Jose are our stations. in the section, but the two kind of differences between them. And okay, so the first alternative is there's kind of a few distinguishing characteristics, and that's what's highlighted. And then there's some common elements, and I'll talk about some of those as they apply here in Atherton. So the first part is the light maintenance facility. We're looking at between the two alternatives, two different options. One is on the east side of the tracks, and one is on the west side of the tracks. In Brisbane, that's where the M is, sort of in the middle of the map. In this alternative, we're not looking at any additional passing tracks, and basically keeping the existing two passing locations that already exist in the corridor. And this alternative looks at an at-grade approach to Diridon Station. So basically, again, using as much of the existing corridor as it stands.
Do you have a preferred option of those? You've been looking at those for several years now.
Right. So we have not selected a preferred alternative, and on the way to that draft environmental document in late next year is when we plan to go to our board with making that decision.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
You say that it's still just be two passing tracks.
So
Is the plan that high-speed rail would get priority and go straight, and Caltrain would be diverted to the passing tracks? Or would high-speed rail sometimes be diverted to the passing tracks?
I think it's a little bit more complicated than that, because it's not so there's two existing passing locations. One is in Brisbane, in the north part of the corridor. One is at Lawrence in the southern part of the corridor, close to Sunnyvale. And it's not necessarily that trains get diverted and sit there. There's kind of what's called a moving overtake. So both trains are moving, one's just moving faster than the other one. And then gets into a lot of the service planning of how do you make the whole blended system work, which is what we're continuing to study with Caltrain in terms of what service patterns make sense in terms of how to both services be able to operate effectively, and try to avoid the situation that you described, which is nobody wants to be sitting in a passing siding as trains go by. So that's something that we're very much looking not to have. Okay, and then the final piece, the blended services we've been talking about. The other alternative has the maintenance facility on the west side. It has what we've called the short middle 4 passing track. That's about 6 miles from San Mateo to the northern tip of Redwood City. That's shown in red here. And then the last kind of distinguishing feature is in the approach to Diridon Station, we have two options where the system would go onto a viaduct. So they're the short and the long viaduct section in the southern part of the corridor. And those are the distinguishing features between them.
The north passing track would end at Redwood City. Would it pass through the station there?
No, so it's basically at around Whipple Road.
Oh, okay, so it'll be north of Redwood City.
Yeah. So it's basically the southern, and southern tip of San Mateo to the northern tip of Redwood City. I mean,
Basically, everything's grade separate in between, too.
Yeah. That's it's interesting how that those line
I
up.
don't know if San Carlos thought, hey, this will make it. But anyways.
Well, and that's what we're looking at, whether that's necessary. So that's part of there's sort of in terms of service planning, making the blended system work. There's how much infrastructure investment do you need? How much sort of signaling and other improvements can you make? And how much of it is basically different stopping patterns and how you run the service. And that's kind of one of the key distinguishing features between the two alternatives, is answering the question of, is this truly necessary? And that's part of what we're going to be doing over the next year or so. So I think we've already hit on all of this, but these are the key dates for what's coming down the line. The kind of next, as we go through, we're starting to do all the technical studies to be able to get to a preferred alternative towards the end of next year, and bring that to our board, and then the draft environmental document shortly thereafter, and then the final environmental document in 2021. So I think that we've touched on these dates. But one thing I just want to quickly mention is sort of there's parallel processes going on with us and with Caltrain. So we're going through the environmental process on the infrastructure that's necessary to introduce high-speed rail. At the same time, Caltrain is got a separate planning effort that they're looking at through their business plan, which is laying out a service vision for the corridor and what that looks like beyond just sort of, you know, us adding high speed to the corridor, and sort of what is the vision that they see going forward. And that's not an environmental process, that's a planning exercise, but those are kind of going on in parallel, and we're coordinating to make sure that they, you know, that what we're looking at lines up with what they would be looking at as well. Getting into sort of Atherton and kind of what we've got here, we recently held a round of outreach with the cities, getting feedback on what we call the PEPD, which is the preliminary engineering for project development. So we shared with each of the cities along the corridor kind of what we're looking at. I think, Robert, you were part of this, if I'm not mistaken. And so some of what we talked about, you know, you can see kind of the highlights of about the safety enhancements. We'll talk about that, and the holdout rule and quiet zones. And then we'll be back in November when we're kind of locking down some of the engineering towards what we're going to study in the draft environmental document. The kind of things that we talked about for Atherton were some of the safety features. So I think you're probably the folks most familiar with quad gates because you have some on North Fair Oaks. But we're looking at quad gates at Watkins Avenue, something very similar to what you have here, you know, up front. Basically looking to make sure that when trains are passing by, that the cars can't get around and get into the tracks. Along with that, we'd be looking at channelization, so kind of similar to what you have when you turn from El Camino, where you can't cross over to the other side, you know, where you're preventing cars from crossing over to the other side. It's the same general idea of trying to limit the movements and trying to limit people's ability to do stupid things of trying to beat the gates. And
Is that for Watkins Avenue, the channelization?
yes.
You probably won't be able to on one side because of
because of the station.
station lane turns left onto.
So, but they'll be looking at that as part of their.
So
It's 20 feet from the crossing.
okay.
There's a intersection.
I believe it is. We'll take a look at it. We have some prototypical crossings that we'd like to apply to Watkins Avenue to see if we can improve that safety improvements. So we'll take a closer look at it.
Just a note here
Yeah.
regarding the channelization option for a quiet zone. I'm assuming that's what you're talking about instead of quadrant gates. Is that why you're talking about it?
Well, for us, it's more from a safe operation standpoint. It is the infrastructure necessary for if this. We can't apply for a quiet zone. It's up to the
Right,
city
no, I
whether you would
understand.
want to.
I
So,
understand.
but it's for us, it's sort of the safety side, and then for the city, if they wanted to, then the city would be able to apply for a quiet zone as you have here.
No, I'm
sorry.
I'm asking a different question. Regarding, you have quad gates at Watkins, then you have channelization, perimeter fencing. Is that an alternative or a supplement to the quad gates? That's what I'm asking.
Those are kind of the common elements that are not, that we're not looking at those as alternatives. We're looking at those as parts of what we would be looking to build.
So all of
Yes.
the above,
Yes.
channelization
Yes.
plus
Yes.
quad gates.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And then the perimeter fencing, I mean, much of the corridor is now fenced. There's parts that aren't, so we'd be looking at fencing the remaining again to eliminate people getting onto the tracks when they shouldn't. I mean, that's the.
Is that something you'll talk to the city about in terms of whether they want it or not?
Well, as they go into the station improvements, they'll kind of highlight what that means.
Okay.
Okay.
A different question. You shared with Robert in the earlier meetings the design for eliminating the holdout
Yeah.
of the Atherton station, whereby you would leave the tracks where they are today and build a platform on the east side of the station with a crossing at the north end and the south end. It's probably not a good idea to have a crossing at the south end. That is within a quarter of a mile of the Watkins grade crossing, and that would interfere with the requirements for a quiet zone in that area. So I would suggest, if you would, that you consider
support
Well,
what,
So-
If that's in the station itself, does that make a difference? If it's part of a station?
As we read the regulations, it doesn't make a difference.
Proximity to,
Let
It's
us-
proximity to
The gates.
Watkins.
We can look at
Yeah, I think
That's the only thing.
we'll look at that question. I don't know off the top of my
Please,
head.
please do, because
Caltrain's official policy is to have as few crossings as possible on the tracks. And so when we read that, what is obvious, the alternative is to use the crossing that exists right now at Fair Oaks Lane. That has a pedestrian crossing incorporated in the Fair Oaks Lane crossing. So people would simply depart the train, walk down to the Fair Oaks Lane, and everyone would cross there. That would eliminate the safety hazard of adding an additional grade crossing, which is a safety hazard. It's in Caltrain's official design on their website.
Okay.
They want to limit the number of crossings of the track. Now, if it is within the platform, that would not be considered a pedestrian crossing because you're not crossing all of the tracks to get, there's a wall back there and there's no place to go. So if it were within the platform itself or within the station limits, it's considered a station crossing. That is technically not a pedestrian
Right.
crossing. If it is beyond the platform, then it is technically a pedestrian crossing, just as you have at Redwood City Station
Right.
there. That is just beyond the platform. That's a pedestrian crossing.
I mean, I think. Go ahead.
Sorry, I'm just wondering, so we have a couple of visuals,
Yeah, why don't you go to the
and I'm
next
wondering
slide?
if we can just maybe even identify as we walk through it,
Yeah,
to make sure that we're,
and again,
this is really good feedback.
right. We can definitely take a look at some of these questions on the holdout rule. I mean, again, I feel like this audience, you guys know a lot about this stuff already, so I don't want to belabor the point about the holdout rule and kind of the reason to want to eliminate it from both kind of a safety standpoint and a capacity and operations standpoint. But the idea is, I think was highlighted, is to basically put a second platform on the other side and allow for kind of both bidirectional running. But we can definitely look at some of the kind of pedestrian crossing questions and the Watkins Avenue crossings.
And you can check on Caltrain's website. It's on their design criteria.
Right.
It is their official policy it's to eliminate crossings, not
Sure.
to add any more.
Yeah.
It becomes dangerous,
Sure.
and it's not a very, it's not a well-used station, surely. People would simply walk to what is already established there, which is a safe crossing. It has pedestrian gates. It's all constant warning time activated.
So just to make sure I kind of understand what you're
Yes.
suggesting is that, so right now the platform tracks, they basically end at Fair Oaks, right?
Yes.
And so instead of having in the southern part of the station another crossing, having the only crossing be on the
Yes.
north side of the station.
That
Okay.
would be consistent with Caltrain's
Yeah.
policy.
Well, and the alternative would be within the platform area, having a crossing platform to platform, not south of the platform.
not outside.
Sure.
Would not
And
should
so-
not be outside the platform.
Yeah,
It's
so
not
as long, it's either within the basically what Narissa's suggesting is either it's within the platform or it's solely at Fair Oaks.
Fair Oaks. Okay. So we'll look at that question.
So I think that in the conversation that I had previously, the idea was within the platform area at the southern end of the station.
And I guess just, I mean.
So at
to-
Redwood City, if we
Yeah.
take that, are you familiar with that station and the pedestrian crossing there at Redwood City?
I don't think I know it well enough to
Okay.
be able to have a meaningful conversation about it. I'll be very honest with you. So, but I'll happily hear what
So
you.
it's a perfect example.
Okay.
That's why I bring it up.
Sure.
I drove there to take a look at it
Yeah.
recently. And what you have there is a situation where the station is mid-shopping center.
Right.
And so when people get off, at any time, if they're at the shopping center and they want to get on one side of the shopping center to the other side, they use that pedestrian crossing. That's available to cross at any time. not station, the train doesn't have to have stock, it's 24/7, bicycles,
Yeah.
baby carriages, people walking can go over that. And that is beyond the station platform
Mhm.
itself. And that becomes problematic when you create quiet zones.
Mhm.
If you, so it's also a danger because you
Yeah,
have
yeah,
people
yeah,
crossing
I
the
get
tracks.
it, yeah.
That is the key issue. And so what typically occurs at stations and it's again, it's in Caltrain's official guidelines, don't take my word
Yeah,
for
sure.
it. But what they say is that they do not want to add any crossings to their corridor because crossings are dangerous. People can, easily get hurt. And so that they propose, and what is typically done, is to just eliminate, have one
Mhm.
crossing of the tracks, not two. It's not a very big station, obviously. It's not a major
Yeah.
metropolitan station. People would simply park the train, walk down to Fair Oaks Lane, and
Right.
use the existing pedestrian crossing, which is incorporated as part of the Fair Oaks Lane larger crossing.
Sure.
So you have a very safe passage there. You have gates already activated by constant warning time. You have the very loud electronic pedestrian bell. It's a very, very safe crossing.
Yeah.
It exists, it saves money, and it decreases the safety issues that
Yeah,
would
I
be.
think we've covered that adequately.
I mean, well, can I just ask the question from the two things that we kind of talked about, which is either just having that north one or having something next to the platforms on the southern end? From this group's perspective, is there kind of one that
Yeah, the north end only would be.
the north end
Yeah.
only? Okay,
Isn't the volume for two?
Yeah.
okay. I mean that
Eliminates a headache.
right. I mean, I don't.
We have plenty of time to adjust our plans to address that issue,
Okay.
so.
So
And I
pl-
talked
please,
to them to
pardon the interruption, let's get on. with
Okay.
the presentation.
Okay, no, but this is helpful. This is good feedback for us to get. So I
This is
appreciate
why
it.
we wanted to have you here.
Just one question
sorry,
about the holdout. So you're going to build an additional platform on the outside. Just want to make sure, I'm not sure if there's enough room to build a platform, but will you have to move the tracks or?
No, we're not moving the tracks,
Okay.
but we'd have to look at what kind of right-of-way takes that we could potentially need. I just saw the fence outside is pretty
Yeah,
close
it's
to
pretty
the
close.
existing-
That's why I'm like, it
Right,
might
so
be.
we do expect a sliver of right-of-way take right
Okay.
there. Yeah.
Okay.
Alright, and we'll keep looking at that question too, and, for what it would take and the platform sizing and all of that. So the other thing I just wanted to touch on, and this is something that we started probably a year and a half ago, is the Connected Community Strategy, and this is something that an effort led by our planning team, and the intention was to get a sense from along the corridor from a lot of the cities of the various projects that are going on in the cities to make sure that we're coordinated, make sure we're not going to be conflicting with something, or if there's an opportunity to collaborate, if we're going to basically dig the hole once, so to not redo things if there's contingent plans that we can partner up on, and also start to understand if some of these things could be potentially tied into the project in some way. And so we've gone through an exercise of mapping those various projects up and down the corridor. What we kind of identified in Atherton are several different things that we flagged as projects that are kind of continuing ongoing, and where this is sort of morphed into, and as we've gone through the process of, hey, we now know where all these projects are, we've kind of realized that we're really the only state agency that tends to be out here talking to people on a regular basis, but we have sort of the tie back into other parts of state government, and people who are running funding programs that some of these projects are eligible for. And so we've tried to do is partner with local cities and communities of trying to align some of these projects with the funding opportunities from our state partners, and basically play a little bit of that interface role with funding opportunities, where appropriate, write support letters, and help to advance some of these things while making sure that we kind of know what's going on. So these are some of the ones that we had for Atherton that we flagged.
Assuming you're also working closely with Caltrain,
Yes, of course.
because they're the ones that have been grabbing data for years, so.
Yes, and we go back and, we've shared this stuff with them, they give us feedback on what they're doing, and, that's a continuous coordination effort. And then just in terms of our outreach, we're restarting our community working group processes with a few meetings coming up here in the next month or so. We're going to be sharing some of the same information that we shared here about kind of 2018 business plan and updates of where we're going, what's in front of us. And you can see the locations the South Peninsula Community Working Group used to be the Santa Clara, we used to call it the Santa Clara County Working Group, but that got confusing because it's the northern part of the county in this section, and so we had a lot of questions. But the San Mateo one is the one that this area covers. I think you're on it. Okay. So it might be a little bit repetitive for you. I apologize. You beat us to the punch by having us here first.
You will have answered all my questions.
That's right.
So I won't have a problem.
Okay. And if I can click, and then some of the other things, outreach activities that we've had over the last couple months. Realize that we still have the Salesforce Transit Center opening on there. Maybe we also need a closing to add to the list here, but I don't know if that's a okay joke to make at this stage. It's a little bit sad.
But we appreciate your sense of humor on the item.
Yeah. So I
Even though
think,
Salesforce probably doesn't.
well, they like to pretend that they built the thing, not just bought naming rights for it. So there's
Not anymore.
maybe not anymore. So.
Are you working with the group that's working on the tunnel?
Yeah, so TJPA is the agency that's in charge of that project. In this capacity, one of my other duties as assigned is on being a board member for them, and so I sit on that board, and then obviously on the staff level we coordinate on the design and the advancement of that project, because ultimately that's where we need to get to.
An update on their work a while back. They've got a lot of options and they're all very expensive.
Yeah, and I mean, this is a bit of an aside, but San Francisco's just adopted what they're calling the Pennsylvania Avenue alignment, which is an extension of that tunnel through another chunk of the city, of what they would like to see ultimately get built. So there's lots of ambition in the corridor.
In terms of
on your timetable of the environmental schedule, that goes through March 2021,
Right.
and you say we're gonna have complete service by 2029. Now, when are trains first going to run after 2021?
Sure.
And what's the sequence of increasing service between 21 and 2029?
Well, I guess the first thing post 2021 is electrification is supposed to be done in 2022. So that's Caltrain, and it would just be Caltrain trains running in the corridor. What we're kind of talking about and looking at is whether we could start a early service in 2027 between Gilroy and San Francisco on the way to that 2029 date. So that's kind of what's in our 2018 business plan. And then that service would continue to grow and evolve over time, of course, as we get into building more and more of the system up to Los Angeles and all of that.
I'm also wondering from things I've heard in the past as to whether during the peak hours there will be enough slack in the schedule so that both Caltrain and high-speed rail would run at their latest proposed schedules. It seems to me there's not room for all of those trains in the peak hour.
Well, so in the peak, kind of in the out years, what we'd be looking at and studying is the 6 Caltrains an hour and then 4 high-speed trains an hour.
Mm-hmm.
And then the trick really gets into what is the stopping patterns that they all have, and that's what we've been working on doing that planning on the service planning side. Because so with kind of a modern signaling system, you can run trains 2 to 3 minutes apart. But that's basically assumes that every train stops the same. If every train looks exactly the same, then that's how much service you could provide. The question then becomes, as you scale that back, depending on how trains stop and what the kind of running patterns are, how you get to that. And what we've seen is that you can definitely do 10, the question starts to become, what do you need in terms of signaling upgrades, and what do you need in terms of infrastructure for getting beyond that? That's what Caltrain is looking at through their business plan, whether they want to get somewhere higher than that or not. That's the open question.
I think Paul made a study that suggested that gate downtime was going to be greater than gate uptime with the two systems running at full planned schedule.
Well, so we'll as part of the process, we'll
Is that
definitely
right, Paul?
Yeah, that's right.
we'll definitely be looking at traffic impacts, which is what gate downtime starts to impact, and so that's one of the technical studies that we still have to do to answer that question for what it looks like at each of the crossings. So I don't have the answer to that question right now.
So Boris, just to add on to what Jack was saying, consideration for ridership as well as consideration for lengthening trains, is that in the analysis as well? Because I think those are factors being considered, and volume.
So ridership drives some of our numbers in terms of, certainly in terms of access, egress, so that's part of what we would be looking at. We are not looking at, we sort of have our basically 200-meter trains that we've been studying, which that's the length of the train that we would be looking at for high speed. Again, there's sort of a parallel question of, for Caltrain right now, they're buying 6-car EMUs. Whether they would want to go to 8 cars at some point, that's sort of the Caltrain side of lengthening trains question. I don't know the answer to what they would want to do.
Yeah, I think the concern is just that when Paul mentioned gate times and Jeff mentioned gate times, length of trains, volume,
Right.
and how are you going to integrate into a system that is expanding as far as ridership? At least they're saying expanding as far as ridership, and once you tap in at a higher rate of speed, what's the impact to number of trains and
Sure. Well, and then those are going to be, so the number of trains and the from a traffic impact, we'll obviously be looking at that, the ridership question, and I guess the way that I kind of look at ridership as the system evolves, there's sort of the within the region ridership, where we're sort of the express train for somebody going from San Francisco to San Jose, for example, faster than they would on a Caltrain train. And then there's the intercity ridership, which is somebody going from San Francisco to Fresno or whatever. So there's sort of multiple markets, and what the right volumes and levels for who serves what is some of these questions.
The earlier work on joint operations showed that in order to maximize the capacity of the line, you had to have the same top speed for all the trains.
Yeah.
Which would mean that your trains on the Caltrain track would go no faster than theirs can.
Right.
Which will probably be topped out at, about 110 miles an hour?
Correct, and that's what we're looking at is that 110 max speed for both services.
Okay.
That's what they're looking at as their future, and that's with the trains that they're buying, they're capable of those speeds,
Right.
and that's the same speed that we'd be looking at.
Okay, thank you. Well, I want to thank the three of you for being patient with us this evening and putting up with all our questions. We do have lots of them because we're very concerned about what you're doing.
Sure.
We're concerned about the service that you bring and about the impact that it will have on our community. So we appreciate your coming and hope you'll come back and we'll have more questions.
You guys know a lot and ask lots of good questions, so thanks for having us, and we're happy to come back at it whenever it's appropriate. We'll kind of look to.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
yes, definitely keep us in the loop as things get ironed out related to information related to pedestrian crossings.
Yeah.
Obviously, walkways, and the station.
Yeah, if you find funding for quad gates or holdout station improvements, let us know.
Well, I mean, those are elements that we're working towards ultimately building. So
Yeah,
that
that would be
is
great,
part of our
yeah.
program.
May I ask a question along those lines? We've at public meetings, we've attended public meetings, and there's been changes in statements as to what was going to be provided at railgrade crossings. And at one meeting about a year and a half ago, a little over a year ago, Mr. Trapuzis made the statement that even though it had been previously announced there were going to be quad gates at every railgrade crossing, a decision had been made not to do that. subsequent to those commitments, not to provide 4 quadrant gates at every crossing, because it is not technically required by the FRA as long as trains operate at 110 miles an hour or less. But now you're saying you have absolutely decided to put 4 quadrant gates at every railroad crossing, is that correct?
So I wasn't here for
Right,
the year and a
right,
half ago,
right,
so I don't
exactly.
know exactly what was said
Right, right.
before. What I'll say is, from what we're studying now and what we're putting into our environmental documents, is having 4 quad gates at every crossing.
Thank you.
So
Okay.
that's
Great.
That's
That's great.
That's great, thank you. Glad.
okay.
Well, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. Take it.
Yeah.
Hey, Robert, I'll help you out.
Thank you for coming.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
And I'll see you
You'll see all of us.
later on this month.
Yes, yes.
You'll all be
And
there?
yes, we'll all be there, and feel free to share
Oh,
the
that's great.
presentation we have for that meeting also with whenever you guys meet.
Thank you, I will, whether you give me permission or not.
I want to
Fair enough.
encourage it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
None of it is secret, so.
Great, thank you.
Thank you
Goodbye.
again.
What meeting was that, Paul, that you were?
It is the community working group. We've had 2 meetings so far over the course of 2 years.
Uh-huh.
And this is the 3rd one coming up. And it'll probably be a lot of the same thing. Now, the next item on the agenda is the electrification update on Caltrain. Robert, do you have any information on that?
I do have a couple of pieces of information. Actually, this morning we got a transmittal from Balfour Beatty on behalf of Caltrain with regards to pole locations and pole types and where they plan to put them through the town. So we'll be looking at that with regards to placement. They're looking for comments. There's really not much for us to comment on other than confirming it's consistent with what they told us that they were planning to do in the past.
You're not gonna reopen that question?
It's basically the same. Is it basically the same?
They're not changing any locations?
I need to take a look at that versus what was conversed in the past, but they have a transition from single cantilever on the north side of the town, transitioning to double cantilever through the station area and then back out to single cantilever. And so the pole heights range from 32 and 35 to 45 feet high or so, which is what they told us they were planning to do.
Do you mind sharing it with the committee, or am I out of place to ask? Is that like
We're experts.
I'm going to say,
because we'll help you review.
We're experts.
But I don't know if I'm out of place asking.
I think what might be more appropriate is if somebody wants to come in and see it in my office, I'm happy to share and get some feedback.
Okay.
I don't think that it's something for committee discussion. But if
Okay.
there's something of particular interest or particular concern, I'm happy to hear what that might be. Again, it's, our ability to change what they're doing is really limited. But there are a couple of inconsistencies that I found that I plan to share with them, just at least for me to get clarification if I'm reading the plan wrong or if there's some other
When do you have
issue.
to get back to them?
I'm guessing in the next week or so.
Okay.
Separate from that, we received a preliminary traffic control plan for the activities required to put the poles in that are closest to Fair Oaks and Watkins. And so our first review of what was submitted, it was insufficient. They gave us something else, but we don't have enough information regarding their staging in terms of what they're going to do first, in what order. We anticipate that the work will happen the beginning part of November, is what they told us, even though they didn't give us dates, and we plan to have what do you call it, have them send out notification to property owners within certain areas.
This is the potholing part of it, is it?
No, this is the actual
Putting in the
pole-
poles,
Putting
right?
in the
Okay.
poles.
So has the construction begun then?
They
With
started
respect to the-
potholing, they started drilling for foundations, is my understanding. But, I mean, they work at night on their tracks up and down the peninsula. The only permits that we really issue to them are the ones that affect the street.
Mhm.
And so to do the poles closest to both Fair Oaks and Watkins, they actually need to close travel lanes. So they're planning on closing Fair Oaks completely during some activity.
Mhm.
And what was confusing on their first set is whether they plan to close Watkins completely or skinny it down to one lane and have flaggers. So that wasn't clear. We're looking for feedback to complete that. But again, we anticipate that the beginning of next month is when they plan to do that. But as I get more information, I'll be happy to share it.
Well, you can shift traffic back and forth between Fair Oaks and Watkins,
That's correct. And so
providing you have that ability.
So our preference is that they're worked on individually. And on this side, it's relatively easy to detour folks from one to the other.
You know,
The concern really is the other side, because the only detour spot is Middlefield,
right.
telling people not to make the turn.
Yeah.
And so that's something that we're gonna be looking at closely when we get those plans.
Out of curiosity, do we have the ability to use that, the emergency sign there to reroute traffic?
We would encourage that they provide the feedback sign, what do you call it,
Informational sign.
the message signs.
The trailer, because I didn't know if we could utilize the county's notification system on rerouting traffic off of 101, because
Okay.
there is an indicator there, so I didn't know if we could actually.
Yeah, I don't know if we can tie into that, that's something to look into, but something that we would definitely look at are changeable message signs that are giving at least a week's advance notice of the work, so that folks can absorb the information.
Yeah.
And so I think that we'll also plan on our part doing the newsflash from the town perspective to get messages out to our residents. And so we'll be looking at how we can also supplement the messaging so that the inconvenience is minimized. So,
It's not like at those hours there's a lot of traffic, but
But there is some.
there
Yeah.
is some.
and if
All we need
you
is
come
one.
all the way up and have to turn around, it's a problem.
Yeah.
So that's the update information I have.
Okay. Going back to the September JPB meeting, the October meeting is on Thursday, of course. Caltrain says that they have completed a test section with the positive train control installed, and they have tested at least one emergency stop triggered by the control system, and it worked. They are still aiming for getting their positive train control installed by the end of December, which is the federal deadline. Which seems a little optimistic to me, but maybe they've done a lot since August.
Is that positive train control system gonna work with overhead cantilever, the electrification component? And
It won't be there. It's gonna work on the optical cable they buried, 2-3 years ago, all down the line. And it has nothing to do with constant warning time. It's only for the control of the trains. It's not grade crossing protection at all. They claim that in August they had 33% of the poles installed in segment 2, which is up Brisbane to San Bruno. And I've looked when I've taken the train and I haven't seen any, but I don't take the train very often.
it's the color choices.
The tunnel work on the 4 tunnels in San Francisco is supposed to start mid-September, they have already announced that they're gonna run a shuttle bypass bus service from, the
Brisbane?
Brisbane station into, Fourth and King.
And also to that station in the middle, what, 22nd?
22nd,
Yeah.
yeah. So, when we take the train during that construction period, it will be a little awkward. The smart money is to get off at Millbrae and take part. The EMU cars, they've submitted car shells for structural testing. They have a mock-up of the control cab, and the Salt Lake plant is up and running and beginning to receive shells for the assembly operation, which will be done there. They approved $3.4 million for the upgrade of the South San Francisco station. They've got a serious problem there. They're gonna have to reroute a utility tunnel under the tracks because they need a pedestrian tunnel at that point to bring people into the mid platform. They're gonna have a mid platform with I'm not sure how that works. Anyway, they're gonna maintain the mid platform, and they've got an underground passage that goes under that. So we'll see what that looks like when the time comes. The only other news I picked up, and this came from Marissa, is that we have a new FRA administrator now, one Ronald Battori, who is again a non-technical person. His only railroad experience is in work on shared assets for Conrail. He sounds more like a bean counter than a transportation type, but that's who they have. And that's all I have on
Are they still gonna have 2 levels of doors?
those are in the cars, Jack.
Yeah.
They've necked down
They-
to 3 stations, which they should have done. They did the right thing there. And you could very easily have high-speed platforms on those stations rather than have all these Caltrain cars with
Yeah.
2 heights of doors. And they've never modified them. And I haven't, beats me. But there we are. Okay, litigation, our court case is still scheduled for October 26th, which is Friday. And according to Stu Flashman, he said the judge will probably issue a preliminary finding the day before, and the attorneys only will be allowed to argue. The attorney that the finding is against, of course, will have a lot to say, but they'll have oral arguments there, and then he will make his final judgment in due course. And that gets us up to the item that we set aside at the last meeting concerning the rail committee operating policy.
There you go. For the evening.
There you
And I don't see that right now. It's
It's the very last.
Here, it's the very last section of the package. I think it's
Yeah.
3 pages in,
Yeah, last 2 pages.
and it starts off, if
Last
you wanna
3
look at
pages.
Exhibit A.
Last 3 pages.
There you go.
oh, thank you. I seem to have missed the last page.
So if you wanna start.
Oh, okay. And
So if it's easier for you, I can start reading through it,
Yeah, please.
because it's a little difficult with some of the crossouts.
Yeah.
And so it's separated into a couple of different sections. One is related to high-speed rail, and the second section is the rail corridor and Caltrain. And so under high-speed rail, which is item A, we have the legislative aspect. And it says, in 2008, the town voters decided against Prop 1A, which authorized the HSR project. At that time, town resolutions passed unanimously by the council opposed the HSR project, including the program environmental impact report, business plan, and use of the rail corridor by high-speed rail. Due to its opposition to the high-speed rail project, the town is opposed to the memorandum of understanding between Caltrain, high-speed rail, Metropolitan Transportation Commission, and other transit agencies, which provides funding for electrification of Caltrain in exchange for allowing HSR to eventually use the rail corridor. In the event that the HSR project is not implemented, Caltrain will have to seek other means to upgrade its system. The town remains opposed to the HSR project and supports legislative initiatives to prevent the implementation of the HSR project in its current form through the town. If the HSR project moves forward, the town fully expects that the project will minimize and fully mitigate environmental impacts to the town. So that's the end of the legislative section.
I think the issue is under the town priorities.
Yeah. So do you want me to skip
We
over
can skip
to that
ahead.
Skip
section?
to that?
Sure.
Okay, no worries. So you said the town priorities?
Yes,
So that's the last section.
Last section.
right.
So, last page, the town recognizes that successful implementation of the town's rail corridor priorities within Caltrain require a partnership with Caltrain. To that end, the town will endeavor to work with Caltrain to address the following priorities for the Atherton Station and rail corridor. Caltrain must restore weekday service. Caltrain must complete a capital project to remove the holdout station in town.
Mhm.
Modernization of the rail station must minimize and fully mitigate any environmental impact to the town. The town seeks to perfect the quiet zone within the town through the addition of quad gates at the Watkins Avenue crossing and upgrading the Atherton station.
That's the problem child, right there.
These measures require the support and partnership of Caltrain.
It's just the one station, or one sentence rather.
Okay?
The town seeks to perfect the quiet zone within the town through the addition of quad gates.
I think instead of perfect, it should be like add on.
Because
That or implement or
the Watkins will be a separate.
it would be a
quiet zone.
separate quad zone.
It would be added on
It
to
would
the
be,
existing.
it would be added on to, that's the proper term, is added on to.
Okay.
So how it would work is you actually prepare everything as a new quiet zone, and then you say in that it would be added on to. So the term is added on to.
So may I make a suggestion, and I'm happy to hear feedback if this this works. The town seeks to add on the Watkins Avenue crossing to the quiet zone with the addition of quad gates.
Yeah, it's more succinct.
Is
that better?
You're saying the proper terminology is that to be in quotes, to utilize it as the,
No, it is actually, it's not
it's
even
just their
in
term.
capital letters, it's just add on to. It's very strange, but
Question is just to say that the Watkins Avenue crossing and what you just read, is that complete enough?
Yep.
Just the crossing?
Yeah.
yes.
Okay.
Okay, and then I'll leave in there and upgrading the Atherton station.
No, that is
You want
what,
that?
that, so that is
a separate
a
item.
separate item
No,
entirely.
that's not
Okay.
related to
It's-
So, so if we
The
put a
town seeks
period-
to-
Town seeks-
The town seeks to upgrade the Atherton.
To have Caltrain upgrade the Atherton station.
we could put that as a separate bullet point.
Yeah, that would make more sense than to combine them.
Okay.
What?
Actually, what I
No,
don't
I-
understand, it already says that in item number 2.
The holdout
Caltrain must
station.
complete a capital project to remove the holdout station in
Okay.
town.
It's repetitive, yeah.
It's
Okay.
repetitive, it should just be deleted.
All right, so what I can do is say, let me repeat this.
No, the holdout,
The holdout is up
station
above,
is a separate deal.
yes. So do we
What?
need any other
The
upgrades as
holdout
part of
has
this?
Oh,
nothing to
well,
do,
yeah, that's,
has
It-
nothing to do with.
Nothing to do with the quiet zone.
No,
Has nothing to do with the
no,
quiet zone.
that's totally separate.
So let me reread what I jotted
Okay.
down to confirm that this is what you want to add. The town seeks to add on the Watkins Avenue crossing to the
Quiet zone.
to the
Existing
quiet zone with the addition of quad gates. This measure requires the support and partnership of Caltrain.
Hmm.
Would extend be a better,
It's,
And
well, we're
it's
just
their
picking,
terminology.
we're just picking the
We're-
terminology
No, I
from
know.
the FRA regulation.
okay,
Just to
that's
be
what FRA
consistent
says
with that.
addition to, not extend?
Yeah,
So-
it's not
yeah,
that,
Robert is actually add on to,
add on to.
To,
Okay.
yeah.
wait a second, it's either add on to the quiet zone, or it's add the Watkins Avenue crossing to the quiet zone.
Add on the Watkins Avenue crossing,
To the quiet zone,
add on Watkins to the quiet zone.
okay?
Okay.
All right?
Was there
On the,
anything else that somebody had in mind with this upgrading the station, other than?
No, it's handled above with the capital project. Caltrain must complete the capital project to remove the holdout station. That's the upgrade.
Yeah.
Okay, there's no other
No, it's not
upgrading,
related.
no
We're
fixing over
not
for
gonna
any of
get a
that
new
stuff.
station.
Yeah.
building.
Do we eliminate the last sentence
We're
about
looking at the state.
these measures require support and partnership?
Well,
Because
I
it seems
revised it
Robert
to
added that.
this measure.
Okay,
Yes.
okay.
Hey, the reality is that
Almost
we
all
have
of
to
them.
work with them for all of this.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
It's kind of redundant in
Now,
that
we
sense.
want a motion from the committee to recommend this change to council.
Correct.
I have another thing to question. Restoration of weekday service, that's pretty open. And if they ran one train a day, it stopped at Atherton, that would be restoration of weekday service.
That's what they've shown on their latest schedule.
Yes, that seems to me,
Do you wanna add more
we wanna
frequency?
make
Full?
number of trains per day.
No, we should not specify that.
Full,
Well, what
full
can we
weekday
do that
service?
will keep them from just
Full-
running
full,
one train a day?
Yeah, that's good, full weekday service.
That's probably a better term.
That'll cover it. and we
Okay, so
can argue
Caltrain
about-
must restore full.
We can
weekday
argue about what
service.
full
Yeah.
And
means.
some will say good luck with that.
More than the minimum of any, the minimum of any other station, how about that?
No,
No.
No, well, you'll have. the
Well, that's
one
what I
down the
would
street
see
From
as-
my house, which is the same thing, so, I mean, I have down the street from me is the only other station that has.
Oh, the,
weekend only
Yes.
yeah, the
service.
The
weekend.
Burlingame?
Yes.
Okay.
You said
Broadway.
I
Burlingame.
do. So,
Okay.
okay,
Any other?
so those are the two comments that I have.
Those are the two changes,
And a motion.
Okay.
and do we have a motion to
I-
recommend?
I move to recommend these changes to council
As modified.
as modified.
A second?
I second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Okay, that's good. Now we can put that to bed.
Okay.
Wow. Let's see what the council says.
Did anybody twitch at his comment when we was talking about upgrading with the east side platform? No, we'll just take a little sliver of land.
Well, I'm gonna say the first time that they presented to me, they indicated that they thought they could do it without taking any. And so I
Pretty
think
narrow
that they're gonna
platform.
continue their process of going through the preliminary design to really find out. And I don't think that we can really comment on that until
We have the plan.
they have that information.
I mean, it depends on, I guess, where the property owner wall is, and if they built it far back enough that maybe they don't have to take it, they just take the land and then maybe not the wall, maybe that might be okay, but, you know, it's something that council probably will have to deal with more than us.
Is there any requirement for minimum platform width?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's the.
There are ADA, I mean, they have ADA requirements that they will have to meet, right? Because it has to be a fully accessible, has to be an accessible platform. They will have whatever their minimum items are that they have to have on that platform.
Yeah, if they need to load a wheelchair from the platform, there has to be
Yeah.
room to do
No,
that.
so there has to be some accessibility stuff that they need to do. I think that the pole configuration I saw had everything on center poles.
Yeah, I think it's also.
Within the station, so it's really a matter of how much room do they need between the train and the platform,
Yeah,
and how wide that platform needs to be.
and where the
And-
property line actually is. They'll
And
need
there's
to
also a
survey.
difference between condemnation for the purposes of having a platform extending, condemnation, acquiring property for the physical platform versus the potential for needing construction easement to be allowed to build it.
Yeah.
So they may need one or both, and that's unknown at this point in time.
Well, another way of achieving adequate platform width would be to move the tracks
Yes,
more towards the center.
and
Seems to be that would be
And-
better
and
than
that
taking
would be,
property from
I
homeowners.
mean, that, I think they'll have to investigate that. There are minimum spacing requirements, center line to center line. And,
They
you
may
know,
have
laying
to
new-
do
laying
another
new
pole arrangement too, if they have to move the tracks.
And frankly, it's a flyover at 50,000, and Alex has a good point, they haven't surveyed anything, those fences could be off. I mean, they're notorious
Has
for
to
being
be
off, so
studied, yeah.
it's a real preliminary look, as you looked out there, oops, maybe this is gonna work.
I mean,
Who knows?
I mean,
one thing I noticed is no dates on any of these things they would like to help us with. So I was like, should I ask them? They'll probably tell me like,
the other thing, I didn't really want to get into it with them, but I think Narissa pointed out that they now have quad gates along the corridor. I have a feeling that they're going to, in their environmental document, look at the potential of what a quiet zone means along the entire corridor,
okay, that's good.
because that's going to help them with mitigating their noise.
Yeah,
And the benefit to us, if that happens up and down the corridor, is we're not the sole spot. There are, I think San Mateo is also looking at the potential of a quiet zone in San Mateo, but if it's a quiet corridor, that benefits everybody.
yeah, I think that buys them. They should do it because it buys them a lot of goodwill, and it's in the grand scheme of things, it's not that expensive compared to billions they're spending on the project. Yeah.
Well, and Palo Alto's looking at that too.
Yeah, so, okay, so next item, any,
Okay, committee and staff member comments. Tony?
Nothing.
Don? Jack?
No?
Marissa?
I have some.
Please.
Last time we were here, I reported that in Denver, the other electrification project which has happened, that the human flaggers had been removed. Within 30 days, on some of the crossings, they were put back. The human flaggers have been put back on 4 crossings. And it's been a month. There is no end in sight. There's no announcement as to what the causes of the technical problem were. But the reason that the human flaggers were put back is that the gates were not coming down in an adequate amount of time. As we talked about last time, the FRA requires that the gates come down 20 seconds before a train arrives. And in the testing, this is after the FRA gave the waiver and after all the flaggers have been put, but there was some additional testing, and they found on the new line, the G line, that's 2 years overdue. Testing for that G line, they found that there was a critical software error and that the gates did not provide the minimum 20-second warning. And suddenly they found out that they have that same problem at 3 crossings on the A line, which is the line that we're familiar with, and on the B line as well. So flaggers were put back on that. And so shortly after that, Denver Transit Partners, which includes Balfour Beatty, it's the private partnership that designed, built, and operates this, has now sued the Regional Transportation District of Denver for immediate declaratory relief and for financial damages, saying that they have been fined $250,000 a month for the last over 2 years since the project has been operational. Because of this difficulty, they were subject to fine, and that they're spending over $1 million a month in flaggers, and they want that money back.
The $250 a month doesn't even show up compared to the flagger cost.
Yeah, 250. So it's a difficult situation because Denver Regional Transportation District is dependent upon Denver Transit Partners. They've formed a separate subsidiary called Denver Transit Operators. They're operating the line. They have nobody else to operate the line. And it turns out that the Regional Transportation District of Denver issued the bonds for the $400 million and then turned the money over to Denver Transit Partners, who in turn reinvested it in the project. So the bonds are actually issued by the Regional Transportation District of Denver. And the Denver Transit Partners has threatened that if they don't get this financial relief, that they're going to pull out of the project. So that would raise the issue of the money, the $400 million, which was invested in this $2.2 billion project. So there really is not a solution yet to this whole issue of constant warning time. The constant warning time is not working.
And I might add, there is no discussion in front of the JPB about the constant warning time problem. None. They've assigned this job to LTK Engineering, one of their in-house engineering groups, and no discussion,
No reports?
no report.
Are they saying they're gonna make the deadline still?
Well, they're trying to make the positive train
Car
control.
PTC deadline, yeah.
But
yeah.
this has nothing.
The separate, as a separate, yeah.
Because as long as they're not electrified, the constant warning time system they have now works just fine.
Okay.
So, no, those are separate, and the one seems to be off in the clouds somewhere.
Exactly. Even though it's identified as the #1 risk to electrification, the constant
Yeah.
warning time, it's
So it is. Malcolm, any comments?
You know, in thinking about why we're here, the issues we were concerned about, one was the elimination of the holdout, and that apparently will happen. At times we thought maybe there would be some way, I don't know why we thought it could happen, but there may be trenching or that sort of thing to minimize the impacts. But the other thing is, I mean, the issue of restoring service, we pay a lot of money into this as a community, and you know, we've been told at different times, Dave Miller, who's retired now, but he was the attorney, of course, and
No.
he assured us, yes, we're going to have restored service. Mike Scanlon would say the same thing, but you know, I come out of this thinking, you know, what are we going to get out of this? I mean, we're going to have impacts negative on the community, and we put in $750,000 a year or whatever for the community into the system, and I guess there is no way to do this, but I mean, I'm not comfortable that we talk about restoring service, but what does that really mean? And I think we really are entitled to it, we're paying into that, and maybe that's not possible, but I mean, I can't feel comfortable that we're accomplishing what the things we were really here to accomplish, and I don't know what you do about it, or what we do about it, but I don't think that's, and of course, Broadway Burlingame, I guess they have this, obviously the same problem.
Well, the difference is that there's another station in town.
Sure, they have another station, but I mean, you know, that was an important station for that community, and
Are they restoring weekday service there? No.
not at all.
There's
Wow.
not enough ridership.
I'm just not, it's difficult because the plan and how they're wrapping around the 2040 Caltrain business plan, you're seeing the same language. You heard him say, we're basing it on projects. And when you start to hear about projects, this and that, that's really where the ridership they're anticipating increasing based on projects. Unfortunately for us, you're right, there are no projects. So the likelihood in the long term is probably pretty low based on their philosophy of, frankly, the ridership capacity of 2020's growth. I don't think we plan on having the growth.
The reality is, though, we had more ridership, and part of that was in the mornings when we had kids going to Castellea and we had the shuttles coming here, and of course we cut that out by they eliminated that service. So that took a lot of our ridership. That was a big chunk for us, and so we're not doing the things that really are fair, and we cut back to impact our ridership by eliminating the key times. It was the early morning was when we had those shuttles coming here. And then not only that, we had much more than that. Jim Jans and I met with Facebook. And as you well know, we looked at the whole issue of getting their employees there, and they are very successful. Only half of their employees come in single passenger cars, half of them. The others get there in other ways. From the south, they're coming up on the Caltrain. And what was happening, they were getting off at the main station there, which was overcrowded, and it was a problem for them, so they pushed that down to California. They wanted to increase ridership. So a lot of these things on ridership, we can manipulate, obviously. So it made sense for them to eliminate that for the downtown station. That dealt with that problem. Gave more ridership at California. And so those people come from the south, and they come to that point in their shuttle over to the campus. From the north, they're bringing them down a bus. They're not coming down on the train. We'd worked out an arrangement where they would, just as they did from the south north, they would take the train down to Atherton Station, which happens to be the closest to their, in time, to their campus. We compared that with, Menlo Park, with California Street. They're not doing that downtown. And they agreed. So Jim and I and two of the Facebook people went up. We didn't talk to Mike. He had us talk to Mark Simon. And it made sense for everybody. It was going to serve the needs of Facebook. It was going to give us the ridership that would justify, and we calculated what we would be getting in service. It was better than what we were getting originally, and it would have worked well, but they had no interest in it. And sadly, it wasn't even Mike Scanlon making those decisions. It was Chuck Harvey and Bob Doherty, because they didn't really want to give us anything, and that for some reason they didn't like Atherton, and that was very clear. But there were things that have happened that we could have had the service, which we're entitled to. We're paying a lot of money into that through our half-cent sales tax, and we're not getting the benefit of it. And I remember when Dave Miller was playing his group in Palo Alto, the jazz group, and Mike was there, and I got into the conversation that, we're going to give you this level of service, and that would have been fine, and we could have justified that based on the ridership. And so the things that are happening are not really fair to us as a community, and that's the frustration to me. I think that, okay, we're not going to get trenching, and we're going to eliminate the holdout, but we're not getting the service we should, and our citizens are paying into that a lot of money. And I think that, and there's nothing we can do about it, but we sit here as a committee dealing with the real issue. And the real issue that serves us, we're not able to deal with that.
Well,
And we had ways to do that, though.
What could we do? We could go en masse to the JPB meetings and stand up and make public comments.
No, I know that, and that isn't going to do it, obviously.
And that's not going to do it.
No, it's not. But I just say,
The bicycle people have been fairly successful with that tactic.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's too bad. It's not fair. It's not the way it should be. There are answers to it, and And there were really just two key people that kept us from getting what we should be getting. It wasn't Mike.
Chuck Harvey was always against it.
Yeah, well, he was a bus guy. He was not a trained person, and he brought a different.
Well, what if
perspective.
what if Facebook went to them and said, "We want this"?
They were with us.
I know, and
I
even
know.
they even said no to Facebook.
They did. Well, they didn't say
Surprising.
anything. They didn't get back to us.
Yeah,
you know.
nothing ever happened.
No.
You had the meetings and poof.
Yeah, and that is wrong.
Yeah.
You know, it's not the way things should work. And
Join the club.
I'm wondering if, like, you know, you could get more folks like the schools to say, hey, we would like to run shuttles to the Atherton station instead of
I
having them
forget
run
how
the
long
Parker
ago it
roads.
was that we lost service.
a long time ago, it goes like that.
2007,
Huh?
I think it
No,
says.
it was more like 12 or 15.
12 or
It's-
15.
It
Well, in
says
those
on
12
the
or
sign
15 years, I
2007.
think the market in Atherton for Caltrain riders has probably changed considerably.
Well, it had.
People used to, and I know I did, decide where I wanted to buy a house based on that I could walk to Caltrain.
Yeah.
And people don't do that anymore, and people have gotten more used to driving than they have to taking the train. So unless something like this Facebook thing comes along and comes to fruition, I don't think we're gonna have many riders boarding a train in Atherton if we do get service.
Well, Facebook is probably the best lever that we could find. They're remaking Menlo Park and destroying East Palo Alto.
Well, we worked out, we had numbers, you know,
Yeah.
their projections, and it would have given us as much, we had more it's been a long time, I forget how many, but I compared what that was to what the ridership was at all the other stations.
Yeah,
And we were right up there in the middle with that.
okay, well,
And-
that's
and we-
where we'd like to be.
Yeah, and based upon that, we worked out a schedule, and Art Lloyd, who was the public
Yeah.
member, I guess he's not involved now, is he?
Lloyd died.
Did he?
Yeah,
Really?
oh yeah,
A year or so ago.
several years ago.
Is that right?
Several years ago.
I knew his
Yeah.
wife had, he was at 101 Elm at the end there, but he was their scheduling person.
Yeah,
And we worked with him, and he was helpful to us, and we had schedules worked out that would have been very positive, even better than we had had before. It made sense in terms of what, if you need to justify it by the ridership, forget the fact we pay all this money into that in this community. It made sense, and the frustration is that nothing happened. I mean, we can sit here and hear these presentations and all, but it's not right, and we're a small community, so we don't have any leverage and all. But Facebook was with us, and we thought, well, you know, they can ignore us, but they were being more responsive to business.
yeah.
And in Facebook's case, putting all the money in that they're doing.
Yeah,
to
especially
this.
they're funding the research into the spur line that
Yeah.
they want to react to.
Well, they want that, and they also put in money for our Dumbarton.
Yeah,
They
yeah,
were
that's
doing
the,
that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the spur line.
And so it's,
Well, should we launch another approach to Facebook and put another package together and see if we can sell it?
that wouldn't be a problem. We could do that. I'd go back to the same people we talked to before,
Yeah.
Deneen, and those people
That
are
would be the
the
thing
key
to do.
people. And they probably will ignore us again, but I think it's worth,
Well, we've got new management there now. I don't know that Hartnett is any more favorably disposed to us than other people. But there are different faces.
yeah,
And,
that's true.
Mark Simon is retired now.
Oh, did he? Okay,
So he's gone.
yeah.
Oh, that's good news.
Well-
So we've got some
Yeah.
new characters at Caltrain to deal with.
Unfortunately, Mike Scanlon was better than Jim Hartnett for art. I mean, Jim's wife is one that really kept us from getting the funding for the holdout. When I retired, she replaced me. And so he is not helpful, really. Mike Scanlon was, but he just wasn't strong enough to go against Doherty and
You know,
Chuck. But, you know, it's, Jim Jans and I, we've had, you know, we were together on this thing. If you're interested, we ought to at least explore.
Well, let's explore it. I think that's a good idea.
Yeah, because we would have the ridership. And-
We can at least test the water and see if there's, see if we can figure out a way to help get something to happen.
Yeah. So if you'd like, Jim and I could go back to doing what we did before and see if that
would be
would,
a wonderful idea if you
Yeah.
would do that.
well, we will then.
Do we have any idea of the number of Facebook employees that are taking Caltrain from north to south?
I did have the,
I mean,
a lot of them. When the numbers we had, if they all came down on the train, forgetting the buses they come down on, the numbers and they would put a small shuttle from our station. I'm not sure how you like to have that many more people come to the station.
The student shuttles were no.
Okay, but we had those numbers, and it put us up to about the middle of every station in this whole line, San Mateo and Santa Clara County and San Francisco. We were in the middle. We could have justified a very high level of service,
Yeah.
and that's what we came up with. And Facebook was all supportive of that, at that point at least. They put, I forget how much money they put in on the study, and that was a big part of that too.
$2 million, I think.
Well,
Into-
yeah.
into the Dumbarton.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
And so,
They spent $1 million on that Dunbar
Yeah.
study.
and it made sense. I mean, the original plans were for that to be a station right there, Andy, for the Dumbarton coming over.
Yeah.
And so I think that, I don't know where it's gonna go, but it's worth at least,
Well, it's certainly a project that we should undertake,
yeah.
rather than just complaining about it.
Yeah.
Get in there and see what we can do about
I
it.
think Facebook is, because they're growing so rapidly, every new building there, and it's like an 10-story building, they're occupying immediately. So they have to find a way to get their employees all into,
Well, and
into
there's
work.
new steel up all over there.
Yeah.
I don't know
Yeah.
what
So-
all the buildings are going to be, but there's certainly a lot of them.
well, all the 1 to 2-story buildings, eventually I think all get bulldozed down.
They're
and
all disappearing.
Yeah,
Six
it's all-
and 8-story buildings.
It's only a question of how fast is Menlo Park gonna let them build on the east side.
Menlo Park has not put a brake on them yet.
Yeah.
It would seem to me that at some point they should, but they haven't.
Well, they've done a good job in terms of getting the people that not coming in just single passenger cars.
Yeah.
That was a goal they've had, and they've been very successful at that, and they were very receptive to this idea. It made sense for them. We drove that to see how long it would take, for their employees with their shuttle and all. It was the fastest. It was faster than California. It's faster than.
Yeah, that's
So
the-
it made sense, and they were all supportive, but it didn't go anywhere.
Well, let's try it again.
It's worth it, yeah.
Alex, do you have any
I didn't
comments?
have anything.
I've one issue I'd like to raise. It's been more than 6 months since we voted to put a plaque out here in honor of Rosemary. And it's my understanding, and I don't know whether this is true, that it's waiting for the final design on the town center, which is still up in the air, before anything can be done. I wonder if it would be reasonable to request that the plaque be prepared and given a temporary site, perhaps out on the
Can I
front lawn
make a
here.
suggestion that you put that on a future agenda
Yes,
for discussion?
I'd like to do that, yes.
Okay.
We can't vote on it tonight, I
Yeah.
understand that.
So, but if you wanna talk about it, we'll put it on upcoming agenda.
Let's put it on the next agenda and let's see if we can get that to move, because it's been a long time. And John hasn't forgotten Rosemary, and he's not going to.
It'd be nice for the plaque to be up while somebody besides
you're
me
still
remember
alive.
who she is.
What's holding up the plaque?
The town center.
I thought it was gonna be put
I
on
thought
a
it was gonna
station.
go on the station.
With the final discussion, we had no right to put it specifically on Caltrain right away.
So we'll put it on the agenda for
Would have to be
the
moved
next
back.
meeting in
We have it
And the
with
next meeting
Caltrain's
is- next meeting
consent.
is-
December.
December 4th.
Robert is kindly suggesting we stop discussion.
That's, you can, once we have it on the agenda, you can talk about it.
So December 4th, anybody have a problem with the first week of December? Any big plans, Christmas parties,
Oh,
everybody's
there's the town holiday
The
party on the 6th.
6th.
It's
Do
Thursday.
you have any words of wisdom for us, Mr. Mayor?
Other than what I've reiterated related to the business plan, the two mesh together and they're basing it on growth, and so it's not a good thing for Atherton, because I don't think we're anticipating growth to the magnitude that they're adjusting their service components. This is the way we're making our decisions.
If we're gonna have growth, we've got to go out and generate demand.
Yes. Correct.
And if we can do that with Facebook or some other source, then we can press for growth. And press for better service, okay? Are there other comments tonight? Do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you all.
Thank
Who
you.
who made the second? I heard like 10 people, so.
Take one.
So-
Take your pick.
Take one.
I'll take Malcolm this time, how's that? All right. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you, Robert.
Thank you.